What happens when the wild animal you save decides you're his entire world and that your loving husband is the #1 threat? The world smelled of smoke and sorrow. For 3 days, a wildfire had chewed through the California hills. The sky had been a bruised, terrible orange. Nora Hayes, a retired veterinary technician, walked through the ash-dusted quiet of her property. Her house was safe, a miracle, but the land around it was black and broken. That's when she saw it, a tiny bundle of spotted fur. It trembled beneath the steps of her back porch. The kitten was no bigger than her hand. Its ears were too big for its head. They were topped with little black tufts. Its eyes were crusted shut. Its breathing was a tiny, ragged sound. Nora's heart ached. She knew what it was, a bobcat kitten, alone. "Oh, you poor thing," she whispered. Her voice was soft. She took off her old flannel shirt and she gently wrapped the kitten in it. The little creature was too weak to fight. It barely moved. Nora burst through her front door. Her husband David looked up from his newspaper. He had been married to Nora for over 30 years. He knew that look on her face. It was the look that had brought home 3 stray dogs, a one-legged crow, and now, apparently, a wildcat. "Nora, honey," he started, his voice full of caution. "That's a wild animal. You can't just—" "He'll die if I don't help him," Nora cut him off. She was already walking toward the spare room. They had turned it into a small clinic for her rescues years ago. "Call Fish and Wildlife if you want, but I'm stabilizing him first." David sighed. He knew that tone. It was the sound of Nora's unshakable will. He had heard it when she insisted they could get through his cancer diagnosis 5 years earlier. He had heard it every time she defended a creature others saw as a pest. It was the sound of her enormous heart. He put down his paper and followed her. The first few days were a blur of careful work. Nora was a gentle and skilled nurse. She gave the kitten fluids with a tiny needle under its skin. She cleaned its smoke-damaged eyes with soft cotton and put in antibiotic drops. Every 2 hours, day and night, she fed him a special formula from a tiny bottle. He was so small, so fragile. She named him Rusty for the warm, reddish-brown color of his coat. By the end of the first week, Rusty's eyes were open. They were stunning amber color. They followed Nora everywhere she went. By the second week, he tried to play. He pounced on a feather toy with clumsy, oversized paws. By the third week, something profound had happened. Rusty had decided that Nora was his mother, his world, his everything. He had imprinted on her completely. Nora called a wildlife rehabilitation center. The news was what she expected, but it still made her sad. "The rehabber says he's too used to people now," she told David one evening. Rusty was curled in her lap. He was purring, a deep rumbling sound that vibrated through her legs. "But you want to keep him," David finished for her. He watched the little bobcat knead Nora's knee with his paws, a look of pure bliss on his feline face. "I chose him, David," Nora said softly. "When I found him, something just clicked. I can feel it." David looked at his wife. He saw the same fierce love that had raised their 2 daughters. He saw the same determination that had held their family together through sickness and hard times. He saw Nora. "All right," he said, letting out a long breath. "But we do this by the book, legally. Permits, a proper enclosure, the whole 9 yards. Nora's face lit up with the smile that could have powered the whole house. Even Rusty seemed to approve. He blinked slowly at David, a cat sign of trust, before snuggling deeper against Nora. None of them knew what they had just set in motion. They couldn't have predicted how a small act of kindness would create a 30-pound bodyguard. As Rusty grew, his devotion to Nora grew with him. It changed from the love of a kitten for its mother into something more. It became an intense, all-consuming mission. He appointed himself Nora's personal protector. It started in small ways. Rusty would place his body between Nora and the front door whenever a visitor knocked. He followed her from room to room, a silent, spotted shadow. He was never more than a few feet away. But as he grew to his full size, bigger than a large house cat, with the lean muscle of a predator. His protective instincts became a major feature of their lives. The first real sign came when their daughter Sarah visited with her new boyfriend, Tom. "Mom, he's growling at Tom," she said. She was half amused, half worried. Rusty was planted firmly on the floor between Nora and the young man. A low rumble came from deep in his chest. His ear tufts were pinned back. His amber eyes were locked on Tom like a pair of heat-seeking missiles. "He's just being protective," Nora explained. She tried to nudge Rusty aside with her foot. The bobcat didn't move. He was as solid as a furry rock. "Rusty, honey, it's okay. This is Sarah's friend." Tom, to his credit, stood perfectly still. "Should I leave?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. No, Nora insisted. She finally lured Rusty away with a piece of freeze-dried chicken. It was his favorite treat. "He'll warm up to you, eventually." He did not warm up to Tom. In fact, Rusty's bodyguard duties only became more serious. His main post was the master bedroom. Every night, he would sprawl across Nora's side of the bed. He looked like a fuzzy, spotted landmine waiting to be triggered. His magnificent, tufted ears were always moving. They were like tiny radar dishes, scanning the quiet house for any sound. The house settling, a car door shutting down the street, or, the most dangerous sound of all, David, Nora's husband, trying to get into his own bed. David discovered the full extent of the problem one night. He got up to use the bathroom. He was half asleep and didn't see that Rusty had moved. The bobcat was now positioned directly on the floor beside the bed. The moment David's foot touched the carpet, a sound erupted from Rusty. It was part growl, part yowl, and completely terrifying. David jumped backward so fast he knocked over the bedside lamp. It crashed to the floor. The crash made Rusty growl louder. The louder growl made David yelp. The yelp woke up Nora. She switched on the light. The scene was chaotic. David was pressed against the far wall, his eyes wide. Rusty was in a full defensive crouch between him and the bed. "Rusty," Nora scolded, though she was trying hard not to laugh. "That's just David. You know David. He lives here." Rusty's expression did not change. He seemed to be thinking, "I know exactly who he is. That's the problem." He kept his eyes locked on David as he slowly backed toward Nora. He placed a single possessive paw on her ankle. "I am being held hostage in my own bedroom by a bobcat." "Oh, honey, he's just being protective." "I know," David sighed, inching toward the bathroom. "Can you tell him I'm not a threat? Maybe show him my driver's license? I have character references." This became their nightly ritual. David developed a system. He would announce his every move in a calm, soothing voice. "I'm just adjusting my pillow now. See? Slow movements. No threat here." The bobcat would watch him with suspicious eyes, but he usually allowed these small movements. The real comedy started during football season. David was a huge 49ers fan. He got loud during games. The first time he leapt from his chair to yell at a bad call by the referee, Rusty appeared from nowhere. He was a spotted streak of fur and fury. He planted himself between David and Nora, who was reading a book on the other side of the couch. His fur stood on end. His short tail was puffed to twice its normal size. He looked like a very angry feather duster with very sharp teeth. "I wasn't yelling at her," David protested, pointing to the television. "I was yelling at the TV." Rusty was not convinced. He held his ground. He stared at him until he sat back down and lowered his voice. Nora started calling it his library-level voice. Their friends found the situation hilarious. During dinner parties, Rusty would patrol the room. He paid special attention to anyone who got too close to Nora. Their friend Robert made the mistake of giving Nora a friendly hello hug. He suddenly found himself nose to nose with 30 pounds of suspicious cat. "He's vibrating," Robert said nervously. A low, continuous growl was coming from Rusty.
"That's his warning setting," Nora explained cheerfully. "It's like a car alarm. Just back away slowly and he'll turn it off." The mailman, Carlos, had the most complicated relationship with Rusty. The Bobcat seemed to decide that Carlos was both a dangerous daily intruder and a necessary part of the day. Every afternoon at 2 p.m., Rusty would sit at the front window. His tail would twitch with anticipation. "Here comes your nemesis," Nora would announce. Rusty would begin his routine. It was a series of chirps and clicks. It sounded like he was giving Carlos a very serious lecture through the glass. Carlos had been on the mail route for 15 years. He took it all in stride. "Good afternoon, Rusty." This would trigger a new round of protective noises from the Bobcat.
But the funniest moments happened when Nora and David had discussions. They rarely fought. After 3 decades together, they had learned to disagree with humor. But sometimes voices were raised. This was especially true during their yearly debate about visiting David's mother for Thanksgiving. "She served Jell-O with vegetables in it last year, Nora," David said, his voice rising. "Vegetables in Jell-O." "It's called an aspic and it's a classic dish," Nora argued back. Suddenly, Rusty was there. He appeared between them like a referee at a boxing match. He fixed David with a stare that could have melted steel. "I'm not arguing," David protested, holding up his hands. "I'm discussing." Rusty's ear tufts twitched. He looked skeptical. "Tell him, Nora, we're just talking about Thanksgiving." Nora bent down and scratched behind Rusty's ears. "It's okay, baby. Daddy's just defending his mother's crimes against food." "See, that's not helping," David pointed out. But he was smiling. It was hard to stay mad when your argument was being mediated by a bobcat. The situation reached its peak during their grandson's 2nd birthday party. 2-year-old Leo was the light of everyone's life. Surprisingly, this included Rusty. The bobcat had accepted the toddler from the start. Perhaps he saw another small creature that needed his protection. The problem started when Leo decided that Grandma Nora absolutely had to see his new toy fire truck, right now. The toddler ran across the lawn at full speed. He held the toy truck high above his head. "Gamma! Gamma! Woo-woo!" he yelled. To Rusty, this looked like a very small, very loud person charging his protected human with a red plastic weapon. The bobcat moved with silent speed. He intercepted Leo about 3 feet away from Nora. He didn't hurt him. He simply placed his large, solid body in the toddler's path. Leo bounced off Rusty's furry side as if he'd hit a spotted wall. He landed softly on his diapered bottom in the grass. For a moment, everyone froze. Then Leo started to giggle. "Kitty!" he shouted, and he immediately tried to climb onto Rusty's back. The bobcat looked deeply confused. His protective brain was short-circuiting. The small human was a potential threat, but the small human was also tiny, and Nora was laughing, and now the small human was patting his head. "Rusty, you can't body check the baby," Nora said through her laughter. She scooped up Leo. "He's allowed to run at Grandma." Rusty made a huffing sound. It sounded like he disagreed, but he allowed Leo to pet his ears. For all the funny moments, there were times when Rusty's bond with Nora was truly sweet. One winter, Nora came down with a bad flu. Rusty refused to leave her side. He curled up on the bed next to her and purred so loudly that David could hear the rumble from the hallway. When Nora's fever spiked, Rusty paced anxiously around the bed and made soft chirping noises until David brought her water and medicine. "I think he's trying to help," David said. He watched Rusty gently pat Nora's hand with his big paw. "He's a good nurse," Nora murmured, her voice weak. Rusty's instincts proved to be genuinely useful one evening. Nora was in the garden alone. An aggressive stray dog wandered into the yard. It started growling and moving toward Nora. Before she could even call for help, Rusty was there. He appeared like a ghost, placing himself between Nora and the dog. The sound he made was not his usual warning growl. It was something different. It was a deep, primal snarl that came from the wild heart of a predator. It was a terrifying sound. The dog took one look at Rusty in his full defensive posture and fled. Rusty held his ground until he was sure the threat was gone. Then he turned to Nora. He looked at her with an expression that clearly asked, "Are you okay?" "My hero," Nora said, her own heart still pounding. Rusty bumped his head against her leg and started to purr. That is how David found them. Nora was sitting on the garden bench with Rusty sprawled protectively across her lap. "Dog trouble?" he guessed. "Rusty handled it," Nora said, scratching Rusty's chin. "Didn't you, my brave boy?" As the years passed, Rusty settled into his role. He developed rules for different situations. Delivery drivers got the window treatment, aggressive chirping but no physical confrontation. Repair technicians required constant close-up supervision. The house cleaners, Maria and her daughter Rosa, had learned to announce their arrival loudly. "Hello, Mr. Rusty, we're here to clean." This would trigger what Nora called his inspection routine. He would walk them through the house, overseeing their work with great seriousness. "He is like a fuzzy supervisor," Rosa laughed one day. But the deepest display of Rusty's devotion came during a health scare. Nora had been having dizzy spells. A cardiologist found she had an irregular heartbeat. It wasn't immediately dangerous, but it needed monitoring.
The night before a procedure to implant a small heart monitor, Nora was too anxious to sleep. She sat in the living room in the dark, worrying. Rusty appeared, as he always did, but he did something unusual. Instead of taking a guard position, he carefully climbed into her lap, all 30 pounds of him. He curled up and began to purr. It wasn't his usual loud rumble. It was a softer, gentler sound. He pressed his furry forehead against her chest, right over her heart. He just stayed there, purring his calm, soothing vibration into her. Nora felt her own frantic heartbeat begin to slow. Her anxiety eased. "You know, don't you?" she whispered, stroking his spotted fur. "You always know." The procedure went well. In the weeks that followed, Rusty's behavior was remarkable. He seemed to sense when Nora's heart rhythm was off, often before she felt it herself. He would appear at her side, chirping insistently until she sat down and rested. "He's better than the machine," Nora told her doctor. As Rusty grew into his senior years, he slowed down. He slept more. His guard duties became a little less intense. He would still grumble when David got into bed, but it was more of a sleepy complaint than a real threat. He was like a grumpy old security guard, comfortable in his routines. "He's perfect," Nora would say, kissing the white fur that was starting to show around his muzzle. The day they had to say goodbye came too soon, as it always does. Rusty developed kidney problems, a common issue in older cats. For a while, they managed it with special food and medicine, but one day it was clear he was in pain. The vet came to the house. Nora would not make Rusty spend his last moments in a scary, unfamiliar clinic. He lay in his favorite spot, on Nora's side of the bed. He was surrounded by his family. "You've been the best guardian anyone could ask for," Nora whispered, her tears falling onto his graying fur. "The very best boy." Rusty managed one last weak purr. His amber eyes found Nora's face. He held her gaze as he drifted peacefully away. Even at the very end, he was watching over her. The house was too quiet. It felt empty without Rusty's constant presence. No growling at bedtime, no supervision during meals. David found himself missing the nightly negotiations just to get into bed. "I keep expecting to hear him," he admitted one evening. He found Nora sitting in the garden, crying softly. 12 years, Nora said, leaning into her husband's hug. "He gave us 12 years of ridiculous, wonderful protection. Remember when he tried to arrest the plumber?" David laughed through his own tears. "Or when he bodyguarded you from that butterfly." To be fair, Nora smiled, it was a very large butterfly. They stood together, wrapped in memory. Then Nora saw a flicker of movement by the garden shed. A tiny, striped form stumbled out, a little kitten, mewing a pitiful, lonely cry. "Oh no," David said. He recognized the look spreading across his wife's face. "Nora, no." "It's just a regular kitten, David," she said, already moving toward it. "Look how thin he is." The kitten, as if it heard her, wobbled directly to Nora. It collapsed at her feet and, despite being so weak, started to purr. "It's purring," Nora said, her voice full of wonder. "It's not a bobcat," David pointed out, trying to sound firm. "It will be a normal cat. No growling, no holding me hostage in my own bedroom." Nora scooped up the tiny creature. It immediately snuggled into her neck. "We'll see," she said. She carried it toward the house. David followed, shaking his head, but he was smiling. "What are you going to name it?" he asked. Nora looked down at the kitten. It was watching her with bright, intelligent eyes. They were a stunning amber color. "Rusty," she said softly. "Of course you are," David sighed. As they walked inside, neither of them noticed the kitten's eyes tracking David's every move. They didn't hear the tiny, almost inaudible growl that rumbled in its chest when David got too close to Nora. But they would. Oh, they would. Because love, whether it comes from a 30-pound bobcat or a 2-pound kitten, always finds a way to protect what matters most. And in the Hayes household, what mattered most was the woman with the heart big enough for them all. Rusty, too, settled into Nora's arms, already planning his security protocols. He had very big paw prints to fill, but something in his amber eyes suggested he was more than ready for the job. David looked at the new kitten, then at his wife's happy face, and smiled. Here we go again. And he wouldn't have it any other way.